The first blush of dawn painted the main street of Harmony Creek in soft pastels, and then, like a sweet secret whispered on the morning breeze, the aroma of cinnamon, sugar, and yeast began to drift from Monroe's sweet delights. Inside, Clara Monroe moved with a practiced grace. Her hands, dusted with a fine layer of flour, knew their dance. Her strawberry blonde hair was tied back in a messy bun, a few tendrils escaping to frame a face that was usually quick to smile, though today a little line of worry creased her brow. Okay, cinnamon rolls first, then the sourdough needs to come out of the proofer. Mrs. Gable will be in for her usual dozen blueberry scones right at 7, she thought, the familiar rhythm of her tasks a small comfort. Her father had built this bakery, brick by loving brick. More importantly, he'd poured his heart into every recipe, every warm loaf, every delicate pastry. Now it was Clara's, her legacy, her everything. The bell above the door chimed softly, a familiar sound. "Morning, Clara dear," a warm, elderly voice called out. "That smell, it's heaven itself." It was Mrs. Henderson. Clara smiled, her voice bright. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson. Your usual apple Danish is just coming out of the oven. Still warm." "Oh, you spoil me, child," Mrs. Henderson replied. "How are things? You look a little thoughtful this morning." Clara forced a wider smile. She didn't want to worry her regulars. They were like family. Truth be told, a knot had been sitting in her stomach for weeks, a cold counterpoint to the warmth of her ovens. Maybe it was fate, or maybe just bad luck, but things felt tight, really tight. "Just planning the day, you know how it is," Clara said. "Busy, busy." She handed over the pastry. "There you go. Careful, it's hot." "Bless you, dear. Don't work too hard now," Mrs. Henderson said as she left. Clara's gaze drifted to the small, cluttered office tucked in the back. An official-looking envelope, stark white against the cheerful chaos of her order forms and recipe notes, lay on the edge of her desk. It had arrived yesterday, and then she'd promptly ignored it because she was too scared to open it. She knew deep down, didn't she? Knew what it probably was. What's worse, ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. Her heart did a little flip, a nervous bird trapped in her chest. Before she could move towards it, the timer for the muffins buzzed, a welcome, noisy interruption. For now, the muffins needed her. The letter, however, would wait, a silent, ominous promise of trouble. And just like that, everything changed in the way she looked at her beloved bakery, a shadow now touching the edges of her sweet-smelling sanctuary. Later that morning, the cheerful bustle of Monroe's sweet delights felt miles away, even though Clara was just in her tiny back office. The unopened letter lay accusingly on the worn wooden desk. Arthur Davies, her late father's accountant, and a man who bounced her on his knee when she was a baby, sat opposite her, his kind eyes etched with a sympathy that made Clara's stomach clench even tighter. He'd come by for his usual Tuesday coffee and a chat, but she'd finally worked up the courage to ask him to look at, well, everything. "You ready to face the music with this one, Clara Bug?" Arthur asked, his voice gentle but grave as he nodded at the letter. Clara's voice was small, trembling slightly. I guess so, Arthur. I've been putting it off. It just feels heavy." With trembling fingers, Clara finally picked up the letter. The paper felt cold, official. As if pulled by a string, her eyes scanned the dense legal jargon. Final demand notice. Immediate repayment. Loan agreement default. The words swam before her eyes, each one a tiny hammer blow. Her breath caught. "Let me see, dear," Arthur said. He took the letter, his brow furrowing as he read. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Clara watched his face, searching for any flicker of hope, but his expression only grew more somber. He let out a long, slow sigh. "Oh, Clara, this is not good. Not good at all. Your father, it seems he took out a rather substantial loan a couple of years back. From a private lender, not the bank. The terms, they're predatory to say the least. And now they're calling it all in. with interest. How much? Clara whispered. Arthur named a figure, an impossibly large figure, a sum that made Clara's vision blur, her ears roar. It was a death sentence for the bakery, for her father's dream, for her. Tears welled, hot and stinging. This couldn't be happening. Not to Monroe's. Not after everything. She'd worked so hard, hadn't she? Tried to keep it all going because it was all she had left of him. But how? Why would he? He never told me. She choked out, a sob catching in her throat. Sometimes, Clara, good people make desperate choices when they feel cornered, Arthur explained, rubbing his temples. Maybe he thought he could fix it before you ever found out. The amount they're demanding, with these terms. There's no way the bakery can cover it. Not in the time frame they're giving. Devastation washed over Clara, cold and absolute. Her ordinary world, so full of warmth and the scent of baking, had just crumbled around her. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the desk. The future, once a comforting haze of flour and sugar, now loomed as a terrifying void. What was she going to do? There's one man I know of who deals in amounts like this, Arthur said, his voice low, hesitant. A man who could solve this. But Clara... He paused, his eyes meeting hers, full of warning. He's dangerous. Julian Thorne. That night, sleep was a forgotten country. Clara sat hunched over her laptop in the small apartment above the bakery, the glow of the screen illuminating her pale, tear-streaked face. Arthur's words echoed in her mind. Julian Thorne. Dangerous. Yet, what choice did she have? The foreclosure notice felt like a physical weight on her chest, suffocating her. So, with a mix of dread and a desperate, flickering ember of hope, she typed his name into the search bar. Julian Thorne. Thorne Global Holdings. She muttered to herself as the screen filled with images and articles. Headlines screamed, Billionaire Playboy strikes again, and the Ice King of Finance. Photos showed a man with eyes as cold and sharp as a winter sky, his tailored suits fitting a frame that radiated power and an almost predatory grace. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that was more intimidating than inviting. Story after story detailed his ruthless business tactics, his string of glamorous, short-lived affairs with models and actresses. He was a man who took what he wanted and discarded it just as easily. Not only that, he was known for his detachment, his emotional unavailability. A shiver traced its way down Clara's spine. Could she really approach someone like this? Someone so far removed from her world of warm kitchens and friendly faces? This is insane, she thought. He'd laugh me out of his office, if I even got past the front door. He probably eats people like me for breakfast. But then, another article caught her eye. Thorne Global Holdings seeks crucial international partnership. It detailed how Julian Thorne was on the cusp of a massive expansion deal, one that hinged on impressing a group of highly traditional, conservative foreign investors. These investors, the article hinted, valued stability, family, tradition. Things a notorious playboy didn't exactly exude. An idea, wild and reckless, sparked in Clara's exhausted mind. It was a long shot. A terrifying, ridiculous long shot. What's worse, it felt like selling a piece of her soul. Could she even consider it? What would her father think? Yet, the alternative was losing Monroe's sweet delights, losing everything. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was her heart, her history, her connection to the dad she missed every single day. She had to save it, because it was the only way to keep his memory truly alive. More importantly, it was her home. Her fingers trembled as she typed out a new search. Julian Thorne, contact. Deep down, she knew the truth. This was a desperate gamble with a man who probably didn't have a shred of kindness in him. But the image of the foreclosure sign of her father's legacy being auctioned off, it spurred her on. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but the tiny spark of reckless hope, it was there too, refusing to be extinguished. "I have to try," she whispered, her voice determined. I have to." The next few days passed in a blur of frantic phone calls and sleepless nights for Clara. She'd reached out to Julian Thorne's office, a desperate email sent into the void, and then nothing. Just the gnawing anxiety and the relentless ticking of the clock. And then, on a bright Wednesday morning, while the bakery was filled with the scent of fresh blueberry muffins and the cheerful chatter of her regulars, the void answered. Not with an email, no. It answered with two men in sharp, soulless suits who walked into Monroe's Sweet Delights like they owned the place. The laughter died. Every head turned. Even the aroma of baking seemed to curdle in the air. One of them, a man with a face like a clenched fist, held out a sheaf of papers. "Clara Monroe?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. Clara's heart plummeted. She knew, didn't she? Knew what this was before he even spoke another word. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "You are hereby served with a formal notice of foreclosure on these premises," he announced, his voice loud enough for everyone in the crowded bakery to hear. Mrs. Gable gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Little Timmy, about to bite into a chocolate chip cookie, froze mid-motion. "You have 1 week to vacate the property or remit the full outstanding amount." 1 week. The words were a death knell. 1 week to save her father's legacy. 1 week to find a miracle. The humiliation burned, hot and fierce, as curious and pitying eyes fixed on her. Her cheeks flamed. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. What's worse, she felt utterly, hopelessly trapped. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her, but beneath it, a tiny, stubborn spark of defiance began to glow. She would not let them destroy her father's dream without a fight. She had to stop this, at any cost. This was her home, her life. She had to save it because it represented everything good her father had built. The men in suits turned and left as abruptly as they'd arrived, leaving a stunned, heavy silence in their wake. As if on cue, Clara's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She fumbled for it, her hands shaking. It was Arthur Davies. His voice, when she answered, was grave, but with an undercurrent she couldn't quite decipher. "Clara," he said, his tone urgent. "Julian Thorne's office just called me back. They agreed to a meeting, this afternoon. It's your only shot, kiddo. Your absolute only shot." The elevator that whisked Clara to the penthouse floor of Thorne Global Holdings felt like a gilded cage, ascending to an execution, or perhaps a very slim chance at salvation. She clutched her worn purse, her knuckles white. When the doors whispered open, a severe-looking assistant with a gaze as sharp as her stiletto heels led Clara through an expanse of cool, minimalist luxury into an office that seemed to hang in the clouds. And there he was, Julian Thorne. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling city like a modern-day emperor surveying his domain. He turned, slowly, and those cold, assessing eyes, the ones she'd seen in countless tabloid photos, pinned her in place. He was even more formidable in person, an aura of power and barely leashed intensity clinging to him like expensive cologne. He didn't smile. He just watched her. "Ms. Monroe," he said, his voice a low, smooth rumble that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. He gestured to a sleek leather chair. "Please." Clara sat, perching on the edge, feeling small and utterly out of her depth. He knew why she was there. His assistant had likely given him the details Arthur had provided. He let the silence stretch, a subtle form of torture, before he spoke again. "Your bakery," he began, a slight, almost imperceptible curl to his lip. "Is in some financial distress, I understand." Yes, Clara managed, her voice barely a whisper. "They're going to foreclose. I only have a week." Desperation made her bold. "Mr. Thorne, I know this is unorthodox, but I saw an article. about your company needing to secure an international partnership, about your partners valuing a stable image. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable. Amusement? Interest? In those cool depths. And you propose to offer me stability, Ms. Monroe. Clara's face burned, but she met his gaze. I understand you need a wife, Mr. Thorne, a temporary one, to satisfy your partners for this deal. Julian Thorne actually chuckled then, a dry, humorless sound. You are direct, I'll give you that. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. Indeed, I do require a wife, and quickly. The arrangement would be for 1 year, strictly business. No love, no messy emotional entanglements, no strings attached. At the end of the year, we part ways, amicably and discreetly. In return, he paused, letting the implication hang in the air. I would see to it that Monroe's Sweet Delights is solvent, and you would receive a rather substantial sum for your cooperation. Clara felt her breath catch. It was an impossible choice, a devil's bargain. Her legacy, her father's dream, saved. But at what cost to herself? Her values, her future? She was intimidated, morally conflicted, but oh so desperate. Could she do this? Could she sell a year of her life, become a pretend wife to this cold, calculating stranger? The bakery was everything. She had to consider this because there were no other doors open to her. Julian Thorne watched her, his expression unreadable. Then he slid a thick leather-bound contract across the vast expanse of his polished desk. Your decision, Ms. Monroe, he said, his voice soft yet laced with steel. Your bakery? Or your reservations? Clara stared at the contract. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the opulent silence of Julian Thorne's office. 1 year. 1 year of pretending, of living a lie, to save everything she held dear. Could she do it? She thought of the foreclosure notice, the smug faces of those men, the idea of her father's beautiful bakery, with its warm ovens and generations of happy memories, being shuttered, sold off, lost forever. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't imagine that future. Deep down, she knew the truth. She had no other choice. This was it. This was the only path left. Her hand trembled as she reached for the expensive, heavy pen Julian offered. His fingers brushed hers, a fleeting touch, cool and impersonal, yet it sent a strange jolt through her. Her eyes flickered up to his. He was watching her, impassive, his face a mask of cool control. There was no sympathy there, no kindness, just expectation. Taking a shaky breath, Clara uncapped the pen. The scent of expensive ink filled her nostrils. She found the line for her signature, her name, Clara Ann Monroe, looking small and insignificant on the page full of dense legal text she hadn't truly had time to process. What was she signing away? More than just her name, she suspected. But what choice did she have because the alternative was too devastating to contemplate? With a surge of desperate resolve, she signed. Her signature was a little wobbly, a testament to the turmoil raging inside her. Julian Thorne took the contract, his expression unchanging. He signed his own name with a few decisive, elegant strokes. The deal was done. Just like that. Her stomach twisted. My assistant, Ms. Albright, will be in touch with the details of our engagement announcement and your move into the penthouse, he said, his tone all business. You will be expected to play your part convincingly, Ms. Monroe, for both our sakes. Ms. Albright appeared as if summoned, her expression as coolly efficient as her employer's. She handed Clara a small, sleek card. Your preliminary schedule, Ms. Monroe, and a list of immediate do's and don'ts. We'll need to arrange for your wardrobe immediately. Her eyes flickered over Clara's simple dress with a barely concealed disdain that made Clara flush. This was her new reality then. Judged, managed, and owned, in a way. As Clara stood to leave, feeling dazed and hollow, Julian Thorne's voice stopped her at the door. She turned. His lips curved into a barely perceptible, knowing smirk, a chilling hint of the power he now wielded over her life. The ink on the contract was barely dry before Julian Thorne's world swallowed Clara whole. It was a whirlwind, a dizzying blur of flashbulbs, reporters shouting questions she didn't know how to answer, and headlines that screamed, "Billionaire's surprise fiancé," or her personal least favorite, "Cinderella Baker sweeps magnate off his feet." Julian's PR machine, a sleek and terrifyingly efficient beast, had crafted a fairy tale narrative that felt worlds away from the cold, hard bargain struck in his cloud-high office. She was moved into his penthouse apartment that very evening, a place so vast, so minimalist and coolly elegant, it felt more like a modern art museum than a home. She was given the guest wing, of course, a luxurious, lonely, gilded cage. Every morning she'd wake up feeling disoriented, the unfamiliar silence of the opulent space a stark contrast to the cozy, flower-dusted comfort of her little apartment above the bakery. Monroe's Sweet Delights was safe, its debts cleared as Julian had promised. That was the only thing that kept her going, because it was the anchor in this strange, turbulent new sea. Julian himself was a ghost, a presence more felt than seen. He was always working, his voice a low murmur from his study, or he was out at meetings she knew nothing about. When their paths did cross, in the sterile expanse of the enormous kitchen or the echoing hallways, he was distant, his eyes cool and observant, giving away nothing. Yet, she often felt his gaze on her when she wasn't looking, a silent assessment that made her skin prickle. What was he thinking? Was she playing her part well enough? She was confused, often overwhelmed and desperately trying to hold on to a shred of her own identity amidst the avalanche of designer clothes Ms. Albright insisted she wear and the endless etiquette lessons for events she couldn't even imagine. Her main goal day by day was just to breathe, to adapt, and maybe, just maybe, to figure out the enigma that was Julian Thorne. A few days into this surreal new life, Julian found her staring out the panoramic window at the city lights, a glittering, indifferent landscape. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stood beside her, the scent of him. Expensive cologne and something uniquely, disturbingly masculine wrapping around her. Then he handed her a thick, embossed card. "There's a charity gala tomorrow night," he said, his voice as smooth and cool as the glass before them. "The Sinclair Foundation Ball. It's imperative we attend. Together, of course." He paused. "You'll need a dress. Ms. Albright will handle the arrangements. Be ready by 7. And just like that, he was gone, leaving Clara clutching the invitation, her heart a nervous flutter against her ribs. Her first test in his world was about to begin. The Sinclair Foundation Ball was a glittering explosion of wealth and power. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears, champagne flowed like water, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken ambitions. Clara, draped in a midnight blue silk gown that Ms. Albright had practically sewn her into, felt like an imposter, a common garden sparrow trying to blend in with a flock of exotic, predatory birds. The dress was a masterpiece, she knew that. It clung and flowed in all the right places, making her look like someone she didn't recognize, someone glamorous, someone Julian Thorne's fiancé. Her stomach did a nervous little flip. Julian, on the other hand, was in his element. He moved through the crowded ballroom with an effortless grace, a king holding court. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back, a possessive, guiding touch that was both a comfort and a brand. Every smile he offered the fawning guests was perfectly calibrated, every handshake firm and assured. He was a performance artist, and this glittering stage was his. Clara tried her best to smile, to nod, to not trip over her own feet or the train of her ridiculously expensive gown. Her main goal was to survive the evening without publicly humiliating herself or, more importantly, Julian. Because, she was quickly learning, embarrassing Julian Thorne probably came with consequences she didn't even want to imagine. Then she saw them, or rather, they saw her. A woman, tall and stunning in a crimson gown that seemed to smolder, detached herself from a group and glided towards them. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elaborate style, and her eyes, the color of ice, raked over Clara with open disdain. "Julian, darling," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness, though her smile didn't quite reach those cold eyes. "You didn't tell me you'd acquired a new pet." Julian's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Clara's back. "Isabella," he acknowledged, his own voice smooth as silk, betraying nothing. "Still bitter, I see." Isabella Vance, Julian's very recent, very public ex. Of course. Before Clara could process that delightful encounter, another figure approached. This one was male, with a charm that felt practiced and a smile that was just a little too wide, a little too predatory. He had Julian's dark hair, but his eyes were different, holding a restless, calculating light. "Julian, cousin, and this must be the lovely Clara," he said, his gaze lingering on her a moment too long. "Marcus Thorne, at your service." He took Clara's hand, his touch cool and smooth. "Welcome to the family, such as it is." Julian's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. There was a tension between the two men, a current of something dark and unspoken that Clara could feel even if she couldn't name it. Marcus Thorne, Julian's cousin, and somehow she sensed his rival. This world, she was beginning to understand, was a beautiful, dangerous ocean, and she was just learning how to tread water among the sharks. She saw Julian watching her, a flicker in his eyes. Was it protectiveness, or just the possessiveness of a man guarding his investment? Isabella, who hadn't moved, leaned in conspiratorially towards Clara as the Thorne men exchanged a few terse words. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, darling," Isabella whispered, her breath smelling of champagne and malice. "Julian devours little lambs like you for breakfast." Later, amidst the swirl of designer gowns and the murmur of 100 conversations, Clara found herself momentarily alone, trying to catch her breath near a towering floral arrangement. The encounter with Isabella Vance had left her shaken, her carefully constructed composure feeling paper-thin. She just wanted this night to be over. "Lost in thought, little baker?" Clara jumped, spinning around to find Marcus Thorne standing there, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. He held 2 flutes of champagne, offering her one. She hesitated. His charm felt like a well-oiled trap. "Just taking it all in," Clara said, forcing a polite smile. "It's quite the spectacle, isn't it?" Marcus agreed, his eyes scanning the room before settling back on her. "And you're the star attraction tonight, the mysterious Cinderella. Tell me, Clara, how does a woman who needs dough for a living find herself engaged to the Ice King himself?" His tone was light, conversational, but his eyes were sharp, probing. He was fishing, she realized, trying to understand the nature of her arrangement with Julian. We met. It was unexpected," Clara stammered, feeling her cheeks grow warm. This was a dangerous game. "Unexpected things are often the most interesting," Marcus murmured, taking a sip of his champagne. "Julian can be complicated, a man of many secrets. Be careful, Clara. Not everything in the Thorne family is as polished as it appears. There are family matters, you understand. Things a newcomer wouldn't be privy to." His words, though vague, carried a distinct undercurrent of warning. Or was it a threat? She couldn't tell. He gave her another charming, unsettling smile and then melted back into the crowd, leaving Clara feeling more uneasy than ever. What family matters? And why did she feel like Marcus Thorne was trying to recruit her for something? The rest of the evening was a blur, more introductions, more fake smiles, more of Julian's cool, guiding presence beside her. But Marcus's words and Isabella's earlier venom echoed in her mind. Later, as they were preparing to leave, Clara saw Julian in a quiet alcove, his back to her. He was speaking in low, tense tones with Marcus. She couldn't hear much, just fragments. The deal is paramount. And then, Julian's voice colder than she'd ever heard it. She finds out nothing. She's part of the plan, Marcus. Nothing more. Don't complicate it. Clara froze, her heart sinking. Part of the plan. Nothing more. The words were like a slap in the face. All the fairy tale headlines, the pretense of their engagement. It was all just a cold, calculated move in Julian's larger game. A game she clearly wasn't even meant to understand. Back in the sterile silence of Julian's penthouse in her lonely guest wing, Clara lay awake for a long time, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling. Julian's cold warning to Marcus echoed in her ears, a cruel counterpoint to the memory of his hand on her back, the possessive way he'd introduced her as his fiancé. He was a man of secrets, Marcus had said, and she, Clara Monroe, was apparently just a pawn in a game she was only beginning to realize was far more dangerous and far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. Her journey into Julian Thorne's world had truly begun, and it was already more treacherous than she'd bargained for. Weeks bled into a month, each day a carefully orchestrated performance for Clara. She smiled for the paparazzi when Julian's sleek black car ferried them to yet another sterile charity dinner. She nodded politely to the business titans and socialites whose names she instantly forgot. And she returned each night to the echoing silence of her guest suite in Julian's penthouse, a place that felt more like a luxurious prison than a home. Sometimes she'd sneak back to Harmony Creek, back to Monroe's Sweet Delights. The bakery was thriving, her small team running it beautifully with the infusion of Julian's funds. And then, just standing there, amidst the familiar scent of cinnamon and yeast, the ache in her chest would intensify. This was real. This was hers. But for how long? What was the true price? She missed the feel of dough beneath her hands, the easy laughter of her customers, the simple, honest exhaustion at the end of a baking day. This new life, this gilded cage, was suffocating her. She tried sometimes to bridge the chasm between herself and Julian, a hesitant question about his day, a comment about the city lights, small offerings of connection. But then he would look at her with those cool, unreadable eyes, offer a polite, non-committal murmur, and retreat back into the fortress of his work. It was like throwing pebbles at a granite cliff. Frustration simmered inside her, a bitter counterpoint to the loneliness that had become her constant companion. She felt trapped, a pretty doll on Julian Thorne's arm, with no agency, no voice, no truth in her situation. What was the point of all this if she couldn't even feel like herself? She was doing this for the bakery because it was her father's legacy, but was she losing herself in the process? One particularly bleak afternoon, as she was staring blankly at a fashion magazine Ms. Albright had insisted she study, a burner phone, one of Julian's security measures, ironically, buzzed on the marble coffee table. It was an encrypted email from an anonymous sender. Her brow furrowed. Who would email her on this? Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. The message was short, chilling. He's not telling you everything. Read your contract again. Clause 17.4. Clause 17.4? A cold dread snaked its way down her spine. The contract. She'd barely skimmed it that day in his office, too overwhelmed, too desperate. What had she missed? And who on earth would send her a message like this? Suddenly, the gilded cage felt a whole lot more sinister. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Clause 17.4. The anonymous email had been a cryptic, terrifying breadcrumb, and now she had to follow it. Her hands shook as she retrieved her copy of the marriage contract from the sleek, impersonal desk in her suite. The thick, creamy paper felt cold, alien in her grip. She remembered Julian's impassive face as she'd signed it, the way his eyes had given nothing away. What had he hidden from her? What terrible secret lay buried in the dense forest of legal jargon? Her breath hitched as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning, searching. And then, there it was, tucked away, nestled innocuously between clauses about confidentiality and public appearances. Clause 17.4. She read it once, twice. A third time, the words blurring, then sharpening into a horrifying clarity. Failure to uphold the terms of this marriage for the full contracted year, or any action bringing disrepute upon the Thorne name that jeopardizes Thorne Global Holdings' current vital business negotiations, will result in the permanent ownership transfer of all Monroe assets, including Monroe's Sweet Delights, to Julian Thorne and forfeiture of the agreed financial settlement. The air rushed out of her lungs. Betrayal, hot and sharp, lanced through her. Fury followed, a raging inferno that burned away the last vestiges of her naive hope. And then came the fear, cold and suffocating. Her bakery, her father's legacy, everything she'd sacrificed her freedom for. It was never truly safe. It was just another pawn in Julian Thorne's game. He hadn't saved it for her. He'd merely put it in his own pocket, ready to claim it if she stepped out of line. This wasn't a safety net. It was a leash. A gilded, diamond-studded leash, but a leash nonetheless. She realized with dawning horror that she wasn't just a temporary wife. She was a hostage, her most precious possession held ransom against her perfect performance. Any trust she might have been tentatively, foolishly building towards Julian, it shattered into a million icy shards. How could he do this? How could he be so cruel, so calculating? It was evil, pure and simple, because it preyed on her deepest love and her greatest vulnerability. Without thinking, fueled by a potent cocktail of rage and terror, Clara stormed out of her suite, the contract clutched in her hand like a weapon. She marched down the echoing hallway towards Julian's study, her sensible shoes making angry staccato clicks on the polished marble. She found him there, of course, immersed in his work, the picture of cool, untouchable control. She didn't knock. She threw the contract down on his antique mahogany desk. It landed with a satisfying thud. "You never intended for me to walk away with anything, did you?" she accused, her voice trembling with a fury she hadn't known she possessed. "This whole thing, it was always a trap." Julian Thorne looked up from his papers, his expression unruffled by her outburst. Those cool, assessing eyes met hers, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw a flicker of surprise before the mask of impassivity slammed back down. He leaned back in his large leather chair, his gaze dropping to the contract splayed across his desk, then returning to her face. He didn't deny it. That was the first blow. A slow, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of his lips. It was cold. It was calculating. And it made Clara's blood run colder. "You should have read the fine print, sweetheart," he said, his voice a low, dangerous purr that was far more unsettling than any shout would have been. "It's always wise to understand the terms of any agreement before one signs." "Fine print?" Clara echoed, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it. "This isn't fine print, Julian. This is a gun to my head. You lied to me. You let me believe my bakery was safe, that I was helping you, and then I'd be free with enough to secure its future." The words tumbled out, a torrent of her betrayal and hurt. She had trusted him, just a little, hadn't she? Hoped that somewhere beneath the icy exterior was a decent man. What a fool she'd been. He actually had the audacity to look faintly amused. "I never lied, Clara. I agreed to make your bakery solvent. And it is. As for the rest..." He shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture that felt like another slap. "Consider it an insurance policy. A standard precaution in arrangements of this sensitivity. My business, my family's reputation, these are not small things. I require absolute compliance, absolute discretion. This clause ensures it." Clara felt devastated, utterly manipulated. He spoke of it so casually, as if her life, her father's legacy, were just minor details in his grand, ruthless game. He offered no apology, no comfort, no explanation beyond the cold, hard logic of his world. She searched his face for any sign of remorse, any flicker of understanding for what he'd put her through, for the fear he'd just reignited in her heart. There was nothing. Just that cool, unreadable gaze. Or was there? Just for a second, when she'd mentioned her father's legacy, had his eyes softened almost imperceptibly? Or was she just desperately searching for a humanity that wasn't there? Crushed, but with a new, defiant fire hardening her spine, Clara lifted her chin. If he thought this would break her, make her a more pliable pawn, he was mistaken. This changed things. She couldn't just passively wait out the year anymore. She needed to understand why. Why was he so ruthless? What was this vital business negotiation that required such extreme measures? And what was Marcus Thorne's role in all this? Her bakery's fate was still on the line, more precariously than ever. Julian watched her, his expression unreadable. Then, he leaned forward, his voice dropping again to that soft, dangerous tone. "This is a world of consequences, Clara. One I navigate very well. You'd be wise to learn the rules of the game quickly. Learn to play, or you'll be crushed by it." His words hung in the air, a chilling promise and a stark warning. The battle lines, it seemed, had just been redrawn. Julian's chilling warning, "Learn to play the game or you'll be crushed by it," echoed in Clara's mind long after their confrontation. And just like that, something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was mingled with a steely determination. She wasn't going to be a passive pawn in his dangerous world. Not anymore. If her bakery, her father's legacy, was truly on the line, then she needed to understand the game, the players, and most importantly, Julian Thorne himself. She started small, cautiously. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of her gilded cage, became her hunting ground. She observed. She listened. She even started baking again, not for customers, but for the penthouse staff. A warm batch of her signature cinnamon scones for the stern-faced housekeepers. A perfectly brewed pot of coffee and some delicate lemon shortbread for Ms. Albright, Julian's formidable assistant. It was amazing what people would let slip over a freshly baked treat. She learned about Julian's grueling schedule, his fierce loyalty to the few people he trusted, and the constant, simmering tension with his cousin, Marcus Thorne. Marcus, she gathered, was a charming snake, always looking for an angle, always trying to undermine Julian within Thorne Global Holdings. The family matters he'd hinted at the gala started to take on a darker, more ominous shape. She was cautious, driven by a need to uncover the truth, a little scared, yes, but resolute. Her goal was simple: uncover Julian's secrets, not to expose him, but to understand what she was truly up against. She had to, because her survival and the bakery's depended on it. Her subtle probing led her to notice patterns. Julian often retreated to a specific wing of the penthouse, one she hadn't explored. And within that wing, there was one door that was always, invariably, locked. Even the cleaning staff, she learned over a shared plate of warm chocolate chip cookies, were instructed never to enter. A locked room. What secrets did it hold? What part of Julian Thorne, the man behind the impenetrable mask, resided there? She became obsessed with what lay beyond that unassuming door. It felt like the key, somehow, to understanding everything. More importantly, it felt like a place Julian was desperate to protect. It happened by accident, or maybe it was fate. A week later, Clara was passing Julian's study when she saw him storm out, his face like a thundercloud, barking orders into his phone about some corporate crisis. In his haste, he'd left the door to his private wing slightly ajar. And then, further down the usually secured hallway, she saw it, the forbidden door, not quite latched. Her heart leaped into her throat. This was her chance. Was she really going to do this? Invade his most private space? But the need to understand, to grasp the truth of her situation, was a relentless pull. Before she could second-guess herself, her body moved on instinct. The room inside was dim, the heavy curtains drawn. It didn't feel like the rest of the sterile modern penthouse. It felt different, softer, filled with a faint, lingering scent of something familiar, Something almost like her bakery? Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light filtering through a gap in the drapes, and as her eyes adjusted, she saw it wasn't an office or a forgotten storage space. It was a shrine. Not to business documents or trophies of corporate conquest. No. This room was filled with mementos of a life. Photographs lined a bookshelf. 2 boys, one clearly a younger Julian, the other with a startlingly similar face but a softer, brighter smile, his arms slung around Julian's shoulders. Old chef's awards, tarnished with age, sat on a small desk. And then her breath caught. A worn, leather-bound recipe book lay open, its pages filled with elegant, spidery handwriting. The title embossed on the cover read, Ethan Thorne's Culinary Creations, Ethan Thorne. The name resonated with a vague familiarity she couldn't quite place. On the desk, beside the recipe book, lay a folder. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, yellowed newspaper clippings detailed a corporate espionage scandal that had rocked Thorne Global Holdings years ago. The articles implicated a young, promising chef within the company, Ethan Thorne. They spoke of betrayal, of disgrace, and then a final, stark headline. Thorne heir's tragic demise, accident or suicide. Clara felt a wave of shock, then a profound, unexpected ache of empathy for the cold, ruthless man who was her husband in name only. This was his brother, his lost brother. This room wasn't just a room. It was a testament to a deep, hidden grief. This was more than just business. This was personal, a wound Julian carried deep within him. She had to understand who Ethan was, because it felt like understanding Ethan was the key to understanding Julian. "What do you think you're doing?" Julian's voice, cold and laced with a raw, ragged fury she'd never heard before, sliced through the silence. Clara spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of anguish and betrayal, his usual iron composure shattered. His eyes, usually so cool, blazed with a dangerous, wounded light. "Get out!" he roared, the sound ripping from him raw and broken. "Get out of here! Now!" Clara fled, Julian's anguished roar echoing in her ears. She retreated to her suite, her hands shaking, her mind reeling from what she'd discovered and the raw pain she'd witnessed in Julian's eyes. She'd crossed a line, she knew that, invaded a sacred private grief. But she hadn't done it out of malice. She'd done it out of a desperate need to understand. Later that evening, there was a soft knock on her door. It was Julian. He looked undone. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, and the icy mask was gone, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it seemed to age him years. He didn't speak, just gestured wordlessly towards the living area. Clara followed, her heart pounding a strange mix of trepidation and a tentative, fragile hope. He poured them both a brandy, his hands not quite steady. For a long time, they sat in silence, the city lights glittering coldly beyond the vast windows. Then, Julian finally spoke, his voice low, rough with unshed emotion. "Ethan was my younger brother," he began, staring into his glass as if the amber liquid held the secrets of the universe. He was a brilliant chef, passionate, creative, so much more alive than I ever was. A ghost of a smile, sad and tender, touched his lips. "That room, it's all I have left of him." He told her then, the story tumbling out in broken, painful fragments, about Ethan, his talent, his dreams, about Marcus Thorne, their ambitious, manipulative cousin, who had always been jealous of Ethan's easy charm and Julian's favor. He spoke of the corporate espionage scandal, how evidence had been fabricated, how Ethan had been skillfully, cruelly framed. And then the accident, Ethan's car found at the bottom of a ravine, a case quickly closed, ruled a tragic misadventure. But Julian never believed it. He knew, with a certainty that chilled Clara to the bone, that Marcus was behind it all. Behind the framing, behind Ethan's death. "This international deal," Julian continued, his voice raw. "It's not just about business, Clara. It's about leverage. If I secure this partnership, I'll have enough power within Thorne Global, enough influence to finally oust Marcus, to expose him for what he did to Ethan, to get justice for my brother. He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it stole her breath. That's why the contract is so unyielding. That clause you found, it wasn't just to control you, it was to protect you, in a way. From Marcus, he'd use anyone, anything, to get to me, to stop me. I couldn't risk him. Trying to manipulate you, to turn you against me, to destroy this one chance I have. He confessed this because he saw something in her eyes in that room, a flicker of understanding, of shared passion for a craft, that reminded him so much of Ethan. Clara was stunned, her heart aching for him, for the lost boy in the photographs, for the crushing weight of guilt and vengeance Julian had carried for so long. He was still a dangerous, ruthless man. But now she saw the cracks in his armor, the wounded heart beating beneath. He had made himself vulnerable to her, shared his deepest pain. And in that moment, she was no longer just a pawn in his game. She was something else. An ally. A confidant. The stakes had become deeply, irrevocably personal for her too. She looked at Julian, truly looked at him, seeing the shadows of grief and the desperate hunger for justice warring in his eyes. Her own anger over the contract faded, replaced by a profound, startling empathy. "Help me understand, Julian," she said softly, her voice clear and steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Help me help you." The fragile truce between Clara and Julian, that tentative step towards understanding, was shattered just days later. It began with a sick feeling in Clara's stomach as she scrolled through her social media feed, a feed that had become a bizarre mix of well wishes from strangers and thinly veiled curiosity about her fairy tale romance. And then she saw it. A link to a notorious gossip website, the headline screaming, "Exclusive, Billionaire Thorne's Baker Bride, Sweetheart or Scheming Gold Digger, Shocking Photos Audio." Her blood ran cold. As if pulled by a string, her fingers clicked the link. The page that loaded was a masterpiece of malicious distortion. Candid photos of her, taken without her knowledge, were twisted with cruel captions. Worse, snippets of audio, cleverly edited from private conversations she barely remembered, painted her as a manipulative opportunist, gleefully detailing her plan to fleece Julian Thorne. It was a lie, a vicious, calculated lie. But it looked horribly convincing. Julian, the narrative implied, was a love-struck fool, easily duped by a small-town nobody. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over Clara. This was Marcus's work, she knew it instantly. He was retaliating, striking at her to hurt Julian, to discredit them both. And it was working. Thorne Global's stock ticker, which she'd inexplicably started following, flashed red on her laptop screen. The comment section beneath the article was a cesspool of vitriol. She felt exposed, violated, her reputation shredded in a matter of hours. Julian found her staring blankly at the screen, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. The poison was already spreading through their gilded world. He felt a crushing guilt for exposing her to this, for bringing her into his dangerous life. Their shared goal was now damage control, a desperate attempt to staunch a wound that was already bleeding profusely. The phone on Julian's desk shrilled, an angry, insistent sound. He snatched it up. Clara could hear the raised, furious tones of the speaker even from across the room. It sounded like one of the elder Thornes, or a key board member. "The partners are threatening to pull out, Julian," the voice crackled. "This scandal, your Baker Bride, it's a disaster. You need to fix this, or everything we've worked for is finished." The line went dead, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. Julian's jaw was granite. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. The fallout from the slanderous article was swift and brutal. The Thorne Global Board, already skittish and now heavily influenced by Marcus's whispering allies, convened an emergency meeting. The message to Julian was clear. Distance yourself from Clara Monroe. Issue a statement. Do something to salvage the international deal or face a vote of no confidence. He was being backed into a corner. The empire he was fighting to protect now threatened because of the very woman he'd brought in to help secure it. Or more accurately, because of Marcus's relentless scheming. That evening, Marcus himself appeared at the penthouse, unannounced, a predatory smile playing on his lips. He found Julian in his study, the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Trouble in paradise, cousin?" Marcus drawled, a picture of feigned concern. "Get out, Marcus," Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh, I don't think so," Marcus replied, circling the room like a shark. "You see, Julian, I have more photos, more audio, perhaps even a charming little story about dear Clara's father and some rather questionable loan agreements. Or maybe a few anonymous tips to the health department about her quaint little bakery. A few disgruntled suppliers. Reputations like bakeries can burn so easily, can't they?" The threat was unmistakable. He would ruin Clara, destroy everything she held dear unless Julian yielded. "Give me control of the new Asian expansion, Julian. Sign over the majority voting rights on that committee, or watch everything you care about turn to ash." Julian was cornered, his protective instincts for Clara warring with the desperate need to protect his family's legacy and his chance for justice for Ethan. He knew Marcus wouldn't hesitate to follow through. Clara, who had overheard Marcus's arrival and now his venomous threats from the doorway, felt a surge of protective fury herself. She wouldn't let Julian sacrifice everything for her. She felt responsible, somehow, for this escalation. "Don't do it, Julian," she urged, stepping into the room, her voice trembling but firm. "Don't let him win." Marcus just smirked, enjoying the drama. Later, after Marcus had gone, leaving his poison hanging in the air, Clara found Isabella Vance waiting for her in the private lounge. Julian's ex looked unusually subdued, her usual sharp edges softened by something Clara couldn't quite decipher. "He's a monster, isn't he?" Isabella said quietly, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. "Marcus, I mean." She looked at Clara, her expression a strange mix of pity and something else. Respect? "You know, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone like Julian is to walk away. For his own good. Before Marcus destroys him completely, using you as the weapon." Isabella's words, though seemingly sympathetic, felt like another subtle, painful twist of the knife. Was she right? Would leaving Julian truly be the only way to save him? The next morning, the news broke like a thunderclap. Julian Thorne, in a brief, carefully worded public statement released through Thorne Global's PR department, announced he was reevaluating his current personal and professional commitments during this challenging time, citing the need to focus on core business stability. It was corporate jargon for, "I'm distancing myself from the baker girl." He didn't mention Clara by name, but the implication was clear. The media had a field day. Clara read it on her tablet, the words blurring through a haze of disbelief and a pain so sharp it stole her breath. He'd chosen his company. He'd chosen his empire. Over her. Over justice for Ethan. The fragile trust, the tentative connection they'd begun to build, it all crumbled into dust. She felt like such a fool. What had she expected? He was Julian Thorne, after all. Ruthless. Calculating. She was just part of the plan. Her phone rang. It was Mrs. Henderson, her voice frantic, hysterical. "Clara! Oh, Clara, child! The bakery! It's on fire!" Numbly, Clara allowed Julian's driver to race her back to Harmony Creek. The sight that greeted her was a vision from a nightmare. Monroe's sweet delights, her father's legacy, her heart, her home, was engulfed in angry, roaring flames. Firefighters battled the blaze, but it was clear the historic building was lost. The scent of cinnamon and sugar was overpowered by the acrid stench of smoke and bitter ash. A suspicious electrical fault, the fire chief would later say. But Clara knew. This was Marcus. This was his final, brutal message. She had lost everything. Her reputation, her hope in Julian, and now her beloved bakery. She sank to her knees on the pavement opposite the inferno, the heat scorching her face, a hollow, desolate numbness spreading through her. It was over. Everything was gone. From a distance, unseen by Clara, Julian watched. He'd arrived moments after her, his own heart a leaden weight in his chest. He saw her collapse, saw the utter despair on her face, saw the reflection of the flames dancing in her tear-filled eyes. And in that moment, he felt a failure so profound it threatened to consume him. He had tried to protect her, tried to control the game, but he had failed. Failed Ethan all those years ago. Failed Clara so spectacularly now. His carefully constructed walls, his ruthless ambition, his desperate quest for justice. It had all turned to ash, just like her bakery. This was his dark night of the soul, the horrifying realization that everything he touched he destroyed. He stood silently in the shadows, his face a mask of anguish, as Clara Monroe's world burned. The days that followed the fire were a blur of gray ash and hollow grief for Clara. The shell of Monroe's sweet delight stood as a blackened monument to her loss, the scent of smoke still clinging stubbornly to the air, a cruel mockery of the sweet aromas that once defined it. Julian had been surprisingly present. Quiet, watchful, his earlier coldness replaced by a somber understanding that offered a strange, unspoken comfort. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply was there. One morning, driven by a need she couldn't quite name, a need to touch something real from her past, perhaps, Clara found herself at the ruins. She picked through the charred debris, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks, sifting through memories and cinders. It felt hopeless, looking for anything salvageable in this devastation, because Marcus had been so thorough in his cruelty. And then, her fingers brushed against something hard, something metallic, wedged beneath a fallen, fire-blackened beam. Her heart gave a curious little flutter. With Julian's help, they managed to free it. A small, surprisingly intact old metal strongbox. Her father's strongbox. He'd always kept it hidden in his office, telling her it held old memories. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the rusty latch. Inside, nestled amongst a few singed photographs, was a worn, leather-bound ledger and a small bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The handwriting in the ledger was meticulous, coded in a way she didn't immediately understand. But the letters, they were addressed to her father and signed with a name that made her breath catch. Ethan Thorne. Julian, who had been watching her with a quiet intensity, went utterly still. Together, they spread the fragile papers on the hood of his car. The letters, dated years ago, just before Ethan's death, spoke of a young chef's dreams, his passion for food, and a growing unease about his cousin Marcus. Ethan had apparently suspected Marcus of illicit dealings within Thorne Global, of siphoning funds, of corporate sabotage. He'd even entrusted Mr. Monroe, a man he'd bonded with over a shared love of honest, quality ingredients, with this coded ledger detailing some of those suspicious transactions. It wasn't a smoking gun, not quite, but it was a crucial piece of the puzzle, a spark, a tiny, defiant ember glowing amidst the ashes of her despair. Clara looked up at Julian. The bleakness in his eyes, the heavy guilt he'd carried for so long seemed to lessen, replaced by a new, fierce light. Seeing her resilience, her refusal to be completely broken despite everything Marcus had thrown at them, and now this tangible link to Ethan's fight. It reignited something within him. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore, it was about true justice for Ethan, and it was about Clara. It was about building a future, not just avenging the past. He reached out, his fingers gently closing over hers where they rested on the old letters. His touch was warm, surprisingly steady. "He won't win, Clara," Julian said, his voice raw with a new determination. "We won't let him." The coded ledger and Ethan's letters became their obsession. Julian, with his incisive business mind, began to see patterns in the coded entries, cross-referencing them with old Thorne Global financial reports he still had access to. Clara, with her intuitive understanding of her father's quirks and Ethan's culinary passion described in the letters, helped decipher notations that baffled Julian. Slowly, a clearer picture of Marcus's early deceptions began to emerge. It was damning, but they needed more. They needed something current, something irrefutable to bring Marcus down for good. And then, help arrived from the most unexpected quarter. Isabella Vance, Julian's glamorous, sharp-tongued ex, appeared at the penthouse one evening, not with her usual air of disdain, but with a cool, appraising look in her eyes. "I heard about the bakery," she said, her voice surprisingly devoid of malice. "Marcus is out of control. He's always been ambitious, but this is different. He's becoming a liability to everyone, not just you two." Clara and Julian exchanged a wary glance. Could they trust her? Isabella had her own complicated history with both Thorne men. Maybe she was the anonymous emailer who had pointed Clara to the contract clause, trying to subtly shift the game. "Why are you here, Isabella?" Julian asked, his voice neutral. "Because," Isabella stated, a hard glint in her eyes, "Marcus Thorne is not just a corporate raider. He's a reckless fool who will burn down the entire empire to rule over the ashes. And frankly, I have my own investments to protect. Besides," she added, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression, "he once cost me something I valued. Let's just say I have my own reasons to see him fall." She then laid out what she knew: Marcus's current illicit operations, his network of spies within the company, his overconfidence. More importantly, she told them Marcus was engineering an emergency Thorne Global shareholders meeting, planning to use the recent scandals and the wavering international partners to seize controlling interest. This was his endgame. An unlikely alliance was forged right then and there, in the cool luxury of Julian's penthouse. The three of them, the heartbroken baker, the avenging billionaire, and the spurned socialite, began to devise a risky, audacious plan. They would use Marcus's own shareholders' meeting, his planned moment of triumph, as the stage for his downfall. They had to, because it was their only chance to expose him before he consolidated too much power. Isabella leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes that now seemed focused on a common enemy. "Marcus is planning to use the meeting to solidify his control. It's our only chance to turn the tables." The days leading up to the emergency shareholders meeting were a blur of tense, clandestine activity. Working from a secure location Isabella provided, Julian, Clara, and their new, surprisingly effective ally began to lay their trap. Julian, using his deep knowledge of Marcus's greed and ego, started feeding him carefully curated, misleading information through channels he knew Marcus monitored. The bait. A false trail suggesting a massive secret slush fund Julian had supposedly hidden, one Marcus would be desperate to expose to discredit Julian further. Clara, drawing on her understanding of people and her quiet observational skills, helped anticipate Marcus's reactions, suggesting ways to make the bait even more irresistible. She also found her courage, her voice growing stronger as she contributed to their strategy. She was no longer just reacting, she was fighting back. Isabella, with her network of contacts and her intimate knowledge of the Thorne Global underbelly, was invaluable. She helped them plant micro-recorders in key locations, coached Clara on how to handle herself if confronted, and procured encrypted communication devices. There were close calls, moments when Marcus seemed to suspect something, his inquiries becoming sharper, his surveillance more overt. The pressure was immense. Not only that, Julian and Clara had to navigate their own complex, evolving feelings, their shared purpose forging a bond that was as terrifying as it was undeniable. They had to overcome their final internal hurdles of trusting each other, trusting Isabella, and trusting their incredibly risky plan. This was it. There would be no second chances. The night before the meeting, they reviewed the plan one last time. The evidence from Ethan's ledger, while old, would establish a pattern of Marcus's deceit. Isabella's testimony would corroborate current manipulations. And the pièce de résistance. They hoped to bait Marcus into a damning admission, recorded live, during the meeting itself. It was a high-wire act without a net, What if Marcus didn't take the bait? What if their evidence wasn't enough? What if he had another, even more devastating trick up his sleeve? The what-ifs were a relentless chorus in Clara's mind. Come morning, the city was draped in a cool, gray mist, mirroring the anxious tension that filled Julian's penthouse. Clara dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was professional, understated, yet conveyed a quiet strength she was only just beginning to feel. Julian entered her suite as she was finishing. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, his face set in lines of grim determination. For a long moment, their eyes locked, a silent acknowledgement of everything they'd been through, everything that was at stake. The fear was still there, a cold hum beneath the surface, but now it was overshadowed by a shared, resolute purpose. This was for Ethan. This was for Monroe's. This was for them. Without another word, Julian extended his hand. Clara took it, his grip firm, reassuring. As they walked towards the door, towards the biggest gamble of their lives, Julian paused, his gaze intense. It's time. The Thorne Global Emergency Shareholders Meeting was held in a vast, cold auditorium, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusations. Marcus Thorne stood at the podium, a picture of calm, statesmanlike concern. He delivered a masterful speech, his voice resonating with false sincerity as he painted Julian as an unstable leader, his judgment clouded by his unfortunate entanglement with Clara. He spoke of plummeting stock prices, of nervous international partners, of the need for strong, decisive leadership to save the company. He was just about to call for a vote of no confidence in Julian, his eyes gleaming with triumph. And then, the doors at the back of the auditorium opened. Julian walked in, Clara beside him, her hand resting confidently in the crook of his arm. Isabella Vance followed a pace behind, a slim, determined figure. A ripple of murmurs went through the assembled shareholders. Marcus's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Before you proceed with that vote, Marcus, Julian's voice cut through the room, clear and strong. I believe there are a few matters the shareholders deserve to be made aware of. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Marcus Thorne's carefully constructed façade. Julian, with Clara occasionally adding a quietly firm corroboration, presented the evidence from Ethan's coded ledger, showing a pattern of financial irregularities stretching back years. Isabella Vance then took the floor, her voice cool and precise, detailing Marcus's more recent attempts to sabotage Julian, to manipulate the board, and to seize control of the company through illicit means. She even produced documents and communications that backed her claims. And then, the final, damning piece of their trap. Julian played a recording, Marcus, baited by the false slush fund information, speaking to a supposed informant, actually one of Isabella's contacts, boasting of his plans to ruin Julian, his contempt for his late cousin Ethan, and his intention to bleed Thorne Global dry once he was in charge. He even callously admitted to orchestrating the unfortunate accidents that had plagued Julian's recent ventures, including the fire at Monroe's. He did this because he was arrogant, overconfident, and believed himself untouchable. Marcus's face, as the recording played, contorted from shock to disbelief, then to a mask of pure, unrestrained fury. Lies! All of it! Doctored! Fabricated! He roared, his carefully crafted composure shattering into a million pieces. He lunged towards Julian, incoherent with rage, but security, already alerted by Isabella, intercepted him swiftly. His downfall was public, absolute, and utterly spectacular. He had incriminated himself beyond any shadow of a doubt. As Marcus Thorne was escorted from the auditorium, shouting threats and denials, a stunned silence fell. Then, Julian turned to face the shareholders, his expression somber but resolute. Clara stood beside him, a quiet strength radiating from her. For Julian, this was peak intensity. It was justice for Ethan, the protection of his family's true legacy, and the undeniable realization that his future was inextricably linked with Clara. For Clara, it was vindication, a fierce pride in standing by Julian, and the bittersweet knowledge that Ethan's suffering had finally been brought to light. She had played the game, and with Julian, they had won. Julian and Clara shared a profound, exhausted look. It was finally over. The immediate aftermath of Marcus Thorne's spectacular downfall was a media firestorm. His arrest, the shocking revelations about his long-term deceit, and the tragic story of Ethan Thorne's betrayal dominated the news cycles for weeks. Thorne Global's stock, after an initial wobble, began to rally as confidence in Julian's leadership was restored. A few days after the shareholders' meeting, Julian formally addressed the board and later, the press. With Clara by his side, he spoke with a quiet dignity and a newfound openness. He officially cleared his brother Ethan's name, presenting the evidence that exonerated him from the old espionage charges and painted him as the true victim of Marcus's ambition. He outlined his vision for the future of Thorne Global, one built on transparency, integrity, and a commitment to ethical practices, a future Ethan would have been proud of. And then he turned to Clara. In front of the flashing cameras and the assembled press, he spoke of her courage, her resilience, her unwavering integrity. He didn't reveal the details of their contract, of course, but he publicly praised her as a woman of incredible strength and character, someone who had stood by him during the darkest of times, someone whose moral compass had helped guide him. Clara listened, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, a lingering grief for her physical bakery, but also a profound, overwhelming sense of connection to Julian, a love that had been tested in fire and had emerged stronger, purer. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that what they had found together was real, far more real than any contract. She felt a sense of peace, because justice, in many forms, had finally been served. Later that week, Julian found Clara in the sunroom of the penthouse. It was a space she'd slowly claimed as her own, filling it with plants and the comforting aroma of test batches of cookies she'd started baking again in the large, professional-grade kitchen. She was bent over a sketch pad, a thoughtful expression on her face. He looked over her shoulder. On the page were drawings, tentative at first, then more confident, designs for a new bakery, a new Monroe's Sweet Delights. It was different from the old one, modern yet warm, with big windows and a welcoming counter. Julian smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Weeks melted into a couple of months. The city transitioned from the cool crispness of early spring to the warm embrace of summer. And with the changing seasons, a new, quieter rhythm settled over Clara and Julian's lives. The 1-year anniversary of their contract marriage was approaching, a date that had once loomed like a finish line, a countdown to freedom, but now felt almost irrelevant. Julian, true to the man he was becoming, had thrown his resources and his quiet support behind Clara's dream. He'd helped her secure a perfect new location for Monroe's Sweet Delights in a charming, up-and-coming neighborhood. It was bigger than the old one, with space for a small cafe and even baking classes, something Clara had always wanted to offer. He'd even suggested, with a shy pride that touched her deeply, that perhaps a line of Ethan Thorne's revived recipes could be featured, a tribute to his brother's lost talent. One sunny afternoon, they sat in the light-filled living room of the penthouse, a space that no longer felt like a gilded cage to Clara, but simply home. Between them on the coffee table lay a slim manila envelope. Unsigned divorce papers prepared months ago by Julian's lawyers, ready for the day their contract expired. Julian looked at Clara, his eyes, once so cool and guarded, now warm and filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. "The contract is fulfilled in a few days, Clara," he said, his voice quiet, a little hesitant. "You're free. Free to walk away, to build your new bakery, to live your life exactly as you choose." Clara smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She reached across the small space and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. His skin was warm, familiar, strong. "I know," she said, "but I'm not going anywhere." A playful light danced in her eyes. Unless you want me to bake you something special to celebrate my impending freedom?" He pulled her closer then, his gaze tender, his heart full. The ruthless billionaire, the Ice King, was gone, replaced by Julian. Just Julian. A man who had faced his demons, found justice for his brother, and in the process, had found a love he never thought he deserved, a love that had healed him. He had helped Clara rebuild her dream because he loved her, and supporting her was as natural as breathing. "I want you to bake me a lifetime of happiness, Clara Monroe," he murmured, his lips brushing hers, "with a whole lot of your ridiculously good cinnamon scones on the side." And then he kissed her. A kiss that held no pretense, no bargains, no hidden clauses. Just love. Pure, simple, and hard-won. Sometime later, the new Monroe's Sweet Delights opened its doors, a bright, bustling haven of warmth and deliciousness, a symbol of resilience, of new beginnings, and of a love story that had started with a desperate contract, but had been baked into something far sweeter, far more enduring than either of them could have ever imagined. Julian Thorne, the man who once built walls, now helped build dreams, his heart, at last, finding its true home.